When the aliens finally found humanity, they believed they had discovered a young species standing alone in the dark, isolated, clever, aggressive in small, manageable ways, dangerous enough to warrant caution, weak enough to conquer in time. So they chose a man at random from a frontier colony and took him for study. That was their first mistake. Their second was assuming he was ordinary. The colony world of Brink lay under a copper sky and 3 small moons, far enough from old Earth that nostalgia had become a luxury and survival a profession. It was a mining colony first, a settlement second, and a home only by stubborn repetition. Windstorms carved the flats. Freight crawlers ran day and night across the scarred plains. Out beyond the lit settlements there was only rock, dust, and silence. Brink was the kind of world people fled to when they wanted space, or when they wanted the past to lose their trail. The man calling himself Jonah Vale had lived there for 6 years. On paper, Jonah Vale was a maintenance contractor who repaired ore separators, coolant systems, and surface rigs. He worked alone when possible, avoided drink dens where people remembered faces, and had a habit of taking jobs in the half-abandoned sections of the colony where equipment failed more often and supervisors asked fewer questions. People found him unsettling, not frightening, just wrong in ways they could not name. He was too calm when machines failed, too observant when others argued, too quick to notice exits, tools, blind corners, security lapses. But Brink was full of damaged people. Worlds like Brink attracted them, and so no one looked too closely at Jonah Vale. No one on Brink knew that Jonah Vale was not his first name. No one knew that on Earth, years earlier, police task forces across 3 continents had built profiles around an unidentified killer whose victims were never merely left behind. They were arranged, posed, curated, placed like statements in abandoned warehouses, flood tunnels, service corridors, freight depots, and forgotten rooms. Not graphic displays of chaos. Worse than that, deliberate compositions, scenes designed to make the witness feel that death had been planned as a message long before the body was found. The media had called the unknown killer the curator. By the time investigators understood he had slipped off-world, hidden in labor migrations, he was already gone. Earth had lost him. The aliens found him by accident. The species that took him called themselves the Rethari. They had watched human settlements from the dark for almost a decade. Their probes reported a civilization still fragmented by distance and time lag, not united, not fully militarized, not yet aware it was being observed. Human colonies showed courage, ingenuity, and violence, yes, but also loneliness, supply dependence, and administrative weakness. They looked to Rethari strategists like a species that could be broken in regional pieces before it ever understood it was under attack. But the Rethari were patient. They did not begin with invasion. They began with study. What they wanted first was a baseline human specimen, healthy, adult, socially typical, someone far enough from witnesses that disappearance could be hidden or misattributed. On Brink, Jonah Vale was perfect, a lone male human traveling outside settlement range in a utility crawler during an electrical storm. At 1:13 local time, the crawler stopped. Every powered system died in the same instant. The storm still flashed above the plains, but around the vehicle, a strange cone of silence settled over the dust, as if the universe itself had taken one careful breath inward. Jonah sat in the dark cab, hands resting loosely on the steering frame, and looked out across the dead headlights into a pale descending glow. He did not curse. He did not panic. He did not fumble for a radio. He smiled. When Jonah woke, he woke restrained upright inside a white chamber with curved walls, cold air, 3 door seams, 2 ceiling vents, 1 observation window polarized from the far side, and 4 aliens pretending they were not nervous. He noticed all of it before he looked at their faces. The Rethari were tall and fine-boned, ash blue under the laboratory lights, their limbs longer than human proportions would allow. Their hands, ending in delicate instrument talons, evolved for control and precision rather than blunt strength. Their heads were narrow, their dark eyes large and reflective, their mouths nearly hidden within elegant facial ridges that twitched subtly whenever they communicated without translation. They had expected confusion when the human woke. Perhaps panic, perhaps rage. What they got was attention. Jonah opened his eyes, looked at each of them in turn, then slowly tested the restraint limits with his shoulders as if taking note of a poorly made chair. The translator lattice chirped, adjusted to his first breath, and waited. Let examiner. Tarev stepped closer. You are calm. Jonah met his gaze. You're interesting. Tarev paused. Do you understand your condition? Jonah looked down at the restraints around his wrists and torso. I understand someone made a choice. That answer was tagged by the translator as non-compliant. Security officer Len Sir watched from the rear of the chamber, disturbed by something he could not quite define. Most sentient captives displayed fear before curiosity. This human seemed to be organizing the room in his head. Tarev activated the first scan sequence. The Rithari examination was not designed to be cruel. It was designed to be thorough. Neural activity, muscular response, cardiovascular resilience, hormonal markers, threat interpretation, pain thresholds, memory triggers, linguistic pathways, political symbols, military architecture, social cohesion. They asked about human governments, intercolony tensions, military doctrine, industrial vulnerabilities, and command response patterns. They showed him images of warships, flags, settlement maps, and urban density overlays while monitoring his reactions. Jonah answered enough to reward their assumptions. Yes, humans were competitive. Yes, they used violence readily. Yes, remote colonies were underdefended. Yes, human institutions were inconsistent. Yes, many populations distrusted central authority. Each answer fit what the Rithari wanted to believe. Each answer made them more confident. All the while, Jonah watched them, not angrily, with growing amusement. The first sign that something had gone wrong was not an escape. It was a question. Tarev projected a human anatomical map and indicated a series of neural pain clusters. Does anticipation increase pain in your species? Jonah considered him for a moment. Sometimes, he said. Sometimes? Sometimes anticipation is the point. The translator rendered the answer faithfully. No one in the chamber liked it. Tarev proceeded to the next sequence, an invasive biological mapping routine using a flexible instrument rig. Routine, clinical. Embarrassing, perhaps, but not sadistic. Jonah watched the machine descend, then looked not at the examiner but at Len Sir, the security officer by the door. Is he in charge of stopping things if they go badly? The translator spoke. Len stiffened. Tarev ignored the question. Remain still. Jonah laughed softly. Len felt the skin along his shoulders tighten. Afterward, while Tarev dictated specimen notes, Jonah asked another question. Which one of you commands this place? No answer. He nodded to himself as if that, too, had told him enough. The escape began 46 minutes later. No alarm predicted it, no scan flagged it. No tactical model inside the Rithari ship had allowed for it. Later reconstructions suggested Jonah had partially loosened one wrist restraint during intake by levering bone against composite tolerances and hiding the discomfort under an unchanged pulse pattern. When an assistant leaned too close to adjust a neural contact, Jonah moved with sudden, absolute precision. One moment he was restrained. The next, the assistant was down, the restraint frame was broken at one armature, and the white chamber had become a hunting ground. The first death was off camera. Not because he avoided surveillance, but because he understood angles fast enough to exploit them before the system reoriented. By the time security seals dropped, Jonah Vale was gone from the lab. At first, Command treated the escape as a containment failure. Seal sectors, deploy teams, flood corridors with stun aerosol, restrict deck movement, recover specimen, routine. Then the bodies started appearing. The Rathari ship Sivareth had been built for research and reconnaissance. Its corridors were smooth, elegant, and orderly. Its compartments were labeled by function, access hierarchy, and environmental purity. It was a machine for classification. Jonah turned that against them. The first security pair found one of their own officers in a maintenance alcove, dead and positioned upright, with gloved hands folded carefully over the chest, head turned toward a wall panel where Jonah had drawn, using industrial marking compound, a neat little diagram of a cage with the door open. Not gore, not frenzy, composition. The second body was arranged inside the specimen preparation chamber, laid upon the examination platform under the full lights, with the instruments around it aligned in almost ceremonial precision. The notes Tarev had made about the human's physiology had been spread across the floor in a circle. Exhibit 2. The third was left hanging in 0G over an atrium maintenance shaft, body rotating slowly above a projected line of text Jonah had pulled from the ship's own lexicon files. Average human. That was when the panic changed shape. Before, the crew feared an escaped captive. Now, they feared intent. Len Sir stood in a command huddle with senior officers while casualty images rotated across the tactical display. "He's showing us things," Len said. One of the command analysts answered too quickly. "He's unstable." Len looked at the exhibits again. "No, he's deliberate." Lead examiner. Tarev, pale under the chamber lights, finally pushed a deeper reconstruction from the human memory scan fragments. Earth homicide archives, unsolved disappearances, behavioral anomalies, facial recognition near transit zones, disappearance into colonial migration records. The room went silent as the pattern sharpened. This was not a representative sample. This was one of humanity's own internal predators, a criminal human law enforcement had failed to catch, a killer hiding among a species that did not even know it was being watched. Tarev whispered the thought first. "We took the wrong human." Len Sir stared at the display. Then, very quietly, "How do we know there is a right one?" Jonah moved through the Sivareth with obvious pleasure now, not childish delight, not mania, enjoyment of a symmetry. He had spent years being the hidden intelligence inside rooms that thought they were safe. Now he was inside an alien ship full of confident invaders who had built an entire operation around misunderstanding him. He seemed to savor the irony of that. He spoke to them over hijacked intercom channels in a tone almost conversational. "You should never assume a quiet one is harmless." A little later, "This ship is much easier to learn than a city." And once, after shutting down the lights in 2 research sectors and trapping a response team between cycling bulkheads, "You asked how humans deal with pain." A pause. Mostly by passing it along. The Sivareth ceased to function as a ship and became a maze of sealed sectors, dead comm nodes, emergency reroutes, false sensor returns, and frightened crews clustered in pockets that felt temporarily defensible. Jonah found the ship's records, the observation files, the colony images, the strategic projections. He discovered with visible delight that the Rathari had believed him to be normal. That pleased him more than anything else. On a lab wall later, written in their own language using sterilization foam and marker slurry, Command found a message. "If this is normal, leave early." Len Sir became Jonah's problem long before he understood why. Not because he was in charge, he was not. Not because he was the most dangerous, he was not. Because he had watched closely. Because he had been in the first room. Because Jonah had seen in Len's face the beginning of comprehension. Predators sometimes spare the witness who understands the shape of the thing. Len did not know this. All he knew was that whenever new messages appeared, whenever another exhibit was found, whenever the lights failed and security teams moved through smoke and emergency red, he felt as though the human was circling him specifically. Once, returning with a four-man team to secure a secondary diagnostics bay, Len found the room empty except for one examination chair under a spotlight and a single instrument laid across the tray in front of it. The same flexible biological probe they had used on Jonah in intake, neatly centered. Below it, in translated text, "You first, next time." The team withdrew immediately. Len did not speak for several minutes after that. What broke the ship's cohesion entirely was not the body count. It was the command deck exhibit. Jonah reached the upper command levels by crawling through thermal trunking, cutting power to surveillance nodes one ring at a time, and baiting response teams into chasing false heat signatures down toward the engine service spine. By the time bridge security realized where he was going, he was already there. He did not seize the bridge immediately. He transformed it first. When the surviving senior officers forced the outer door, they found the chamber dark except for the viewport stars and a line of low floor lights Jonah had turned into a gallery path. 3 dead officers had been placed at separate stations in poses mimicking normal duty. 1 at navigation, 1 at tactical, 1 at command oversight. Their heads were turned toward the central display, where Jonah had pulled up the Rathari invasion projections for human colonies. Across those projections, he had drawn one clean line. "Cancel this," not scratched in rage, written like a curator labeling a piece. Even Tarev, horrified beyond expression, could not deny the intelligence behind it. Jonah was not merely killing. He was editing the ship's confidence, rearranging the psychology of an invading species in real time. Every death said the same thing. "You came here to study us. Now study!" The collapse accelerated after that. Some crew tried to mutiny and take escape craft. Others barricaded themselves in research holds. A few begged command to vent contaminated sectors and kill the human with atmosphere loss, but no one could guarantee where he was anymore. Worse, he seemed to move fastest precisely when the ship thought it had cornered him. Len Ser finally found lead examiner Tarev in a sealed biological archive where the older alien was trying, with trembling hands, to compile a final report. "He's forcing us apart," Len said. Tarev looked up, hollow-eyed. "He enjoys it." Len did not answer. Tarev continued more quietly. "He stages the dead because he wants witnesses before memory. He wants the scene understood before the body is feared." That landed heavily, because it meant the surviving crew were not merely targets. They were audience. Len asked the question he had avoided all cycle. "Why am I still alive?" Neither of them answered. The answer arrived later. Jonah found them in the archive before security seals completed. He stepped through the half-closed door carrying no visible weapon, which somehow felt worse than if he had entered armed. He was spattered with soot, one sleeve burned away to the elbow, a cut along his cheek already drying dark, and in his eyes sat the cold exhilaration of a man fully engaged in the thing he was made for. Tarev reached for an alarm stud. Jonah looked at him once. Tarev froze. Then Jonah pointed at Len. "Him!" Len's throat tightened. Tarev stammered. "Why?" Jonah's expression barely changed. "Because he listens." He did not kill Tarev quickly, but the details mattered less than the aftermath. When Len later staggered back into the corridor, Tarev had become another exhibit. The archive around him transformed into a statement about research, power, and misjudgment. The report he had tried to compile had been left open on the terminal, one line repeated over and over in auto-translated script. "Not normal, not normal, not normal." Len Ser was shaking by then. And Jonah, somehow patient in the middle of ruin, led him through the failing ship toward command access. "You're going to take me home," he said. Len swallowed. Why not kill me? Jonah smiled faintly. I'm deciding how useful you are. That answer stayed with Len for the rest of his life. Pause. By then, the Sivareth was no longer salvageable as a mission platform. 3 compartment fires burned uncontrolled. Internal security was dead. Sensor geometry was corrupted. 2 subcraft bays were crippled. And the nearest human colony world hung beneath them in the black like a waiting witness. Brink. Jonah made Len bring the ship down in the Badlands beyond the colony's main crawler routes. The descent was hard and ugly, tearing one flank of the vessel across red stone and showering dust high into the thin air. The impact killed the last argument inside the ship that they still controlled events. When the landing legs finally settled into the fractured plane, alarms were still sounding through half the vessel. Jonah stood beside Len at the auxiliary control pit, watching the colony lights far in the distance. "You've studied us for years," Jonah said. Len said nothing. "You thought you'd invade eventually." Still nothing. Jonah turned his head slightly. "You should be grateful you found me first." Len forced the words out. "You are not what humans are." Jonah looked at him, and for the first time something almost warm entered his expression. "No," he said, "but you don't know that." The implication was worse than a threat. Before he left, Jonah performed one final act of humiliation. He took Len Sir back to the same medical intake suite where the human had first awakened, restrained, and studied. He strapped the surviving security officer into the examination frame with clinical efficiency, selected the flexible invasive bioprobe the Rathari used in routine specimen work, and activated the system with a calmness so chilling that Len later found it harder to describe than any scream. Jonah leaned in close enough for the translator to catch every word. "You wanted to understand the species?" His smile was small and genuine. "Try empathy." He left Len there only long enough for the shame and helplessness to root themselves into memory. Not as revenge in any balanced sense, as theater, as punctuation, as the final inversion of hunter and specimen. Then he unstrapped him, shoved the ship's return vectors into his hands, and marched him to the ramp. The dust storms of Brink rolled beyond the open hatch like a living wall. Jonah stepped down into them, then looked back once. Len, shaking, managed to ask the question that had been eating at him since the archive. "Why spare me?" Wind howled through the broken landing corridor. Jonah's answer came almost gently. "Because dead things stay where you leave them." He glanced back toward the ruined ship. "Fear travels." Then he vanished into the storm. Len Sir returned to Rathari space alone. The journey took months. The debrief took longer. At first, the strategic houses believed that trauma had broken his account. One human infiltrates a covert research vessel, dismantles its crew, corrupts its command structure, forces planetary return, humiliates a surviving officer, and walks away after arranging the evidence like a message. Impossible. Then they reviewed the ship logs. The body placements, the intercom captures, the command deck display, the invasion files marked by human hand, the psychological collapse curves across the surviving crew, the recovered Earth fragments identifying Jonah's real history as one of humanity's own uncaught killers. The room fell silent after that, not merely because of what Jonah had done, because the Rathari had mistaken him for ordinary. Len Sir, who had once watched over the specimen chamber thinking himself superior, stood before strategists, military planners, species analysts, and invasion economists and told them exactly what they wanted least to hear. "We selected him as representative." A strategist answered sharply, "But he was exceptional." Len thought of Jonah in the dark corridors, Jonah smiling at the records that called him normal. Jonah saying, "You don't know that." Then Len gave the answer that ended Rathari expansion planning forever. "Would you bet your civilization on that?" No one spoke. Len continued, voice unsteady but clear. He was not military, not selected defense, not a leader, not an engineered weapon. He was a hidden criminal produced by their own species and missed by their own authorities. He let that settle. And he enjoyed us. That line entered Rethari strategic doctrine unchanged. Within a year, every covert asset in human territory was withdrawn. Observation programs were terminated. Invasion studies suspended indefinitely. Humanity was reclassified not as a conquest candidate, but as an unacceptable uncertainty. Officially, the Rethari rationale remained sealed. Unofficially, among command circles and deep space navigators, the warning spread in whispers. They took one human thinking it was average. Never make that mistake again. Back on Brink, the man once called Jonah Vale returned to settlement life after several days missing with a burn on one hand, a half-healed cut on his cheek, and a calm explanation about a crawler accident in the storms. People believed him. Why would they not? Humanity still thought it was alone. And somewhere in the dark between stars, an alien species carried a story home about the human it had captured by chance. The exhibits he left behind, and the smile he wore when he realized they thought he was normal. After that, the Rethari never again discussed invading human space without remembering the same final possibility. If that was a mistake, what if humanity's real defenders were worse?